Welcome to the Expansive CEO podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Chapman, founder of Expansive CEO and X Squared Wealth Planning. Buckle in as we explore how to create true prosperity and build a business and a life that expands beyond yourself and makes a dent in the universe. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Expansive CEO podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Chapman, and this is a continuation of the relationship series that we are focusing on here at the beginning of 2025. So we've had two episodes already in this series, one about especially about romantic relationships, one really focused on business partnerships and relationships and how we grow there. And today, my guest is Arlene Washburn, who is an award-winning innovator in matchmaking and an ethical matchmaking advocate and trainer at Love Pro Mastermind Academy. And so we are going to dive into all kinds of relationship and how we grow and change and shift through relationship and how important that is to us as human beings. So Arlene, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. I am so grateful to have you, and I would love for you to share more about who you are, what you're doing in the world, and why this matters.
Thank you so much for having me, Hannah. This is such an important conversation to be had, especially today. Today's Quitters Day, by the way.
I didn't know that January 10th as we record
January
this.
10th, yes, as we recorded. And I really think that this is a great conversation to be having, whether people hear it later on or not, that will keep people motivated because as we were discussing earlier, there is a loneliness epidemic in not just in the US, and actually the Surgeon General put out a report about this, but also around the world. People are not as connected and it's creating problems, including health problems and everything else. So I used to be a matchmaker and decided I would help other practitioners instead through the Love Pro Mastermind Academy. And I thought that I could spread love a lot more efficiently that way and really touch more people by helping those who are doing it. And because matchmaking is offline, I think it is the number one growing thing right now because people just are tired of the apps. There are thousands and thousands of apps right now. And people want to get off and meet people in real life and have a connection. So it starts with a connection with your matchmaker because it's a one-on-one conversation and relationship. And then they introduce you to people, make sure that you show up, etc. So that's very exciting. And then, of course, the ethics and compliance is a huge aspect to what I do. I spent 20 years in the pharmaceutical industry, which is very highly regulated. So I come from a background of regulations. And when I joined this industry over a decade ago, I realized that there wasn't a lot of regulation, and therefore people make mistakes and don't follow guidance and ethics and things inadvertently. And so I'm creating a lot of education around that so that people can comply with laws and just ethical practices.
Yeah, so I can highly relate to that as well, being in the financial space, right? Like super highly regulated as well, as it should be, to protect consumers. Um, and yeah, that's the corollary is so funny because there's now this like really huge burgeoning money coaching space where there's not regulation and people, do things that aren't necessarily ethical or in the best. They don't have to be a fiduciary. They're not held to a fiduciary standard. So, they make recommendations and all these things that in the, protected financial industry, like, oh, we can't do that because we have to make sure we're doing things that are in the best interest of the client at all times. And so I'm hearing, yeah, very similar case here with matchmaking. Like, let's bring higher standards to the table. Is that what it is?
Yeah, and that's really what it boils down to. It's all about the client. And then, of course, helping these individuals who are running these companies to be successful in the work that they do, which honestly is very fulfilling. When you put people together and see these couples, get married and have children is very fulfilling, but it's also a business. And so it's important to conduct yourself in a way that is complying with the laws and also very ethical. And because there's not a lot of barrier to entry, unlike some industries where you have to get you have to be educated and get some sort of certification to start that business. Unfortunately, that is not the case in our industry. So a lot of the training that's available out there is, maybe a 12-week module to do something that is so major and so important. It's just not enough information for people to be successful and to do it in the best possible way. So that's why I'm attracted to it. And I always say now that I figured out what I want to be when I grow up because I love what I do. I wake up every morning excited to do something with this industry.
I love that. And so I think that like dovetails perfectly into this conversation around why are relationships important? Why is matchmaking important? Because people have a hard time, especially if you are, you know, in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and looking for a partner. Like what I hear a lot and see is like, where do you even meet people? How do you like put yourself out of your comfort zone? How do you find someone who shares any of your interests or, that you can build a life with when for many people, especially if you're in your, 30s, 40s, have a career, have it established, you have a life, right? And it's like bringing two lives together. Um, and so this, what I'm curious about and what the angle that I feel is really important with relationships is how do we how do we allow ourselves to be in relationship even when it's difficult? And how do we get into relationships when we know that there's potential for heartbreak, there's potential for things to not feel great all the time, right? So there are different movements on both sides, men and women, and all across the gender spectrum of people wanting to say like opt out
Mm.
and isolate themselves and be like, I don't need a romantic relationship. And in some ways, I can agree with that. Like, okay, that's your choice. Anyone can choose that. But regardless of if you're looking for a romantic relationship or not, you still need human connection. You still need some sort of deep friendships, supportive people in your life, right? This is what community is about. Whether you are married to the person or living with them romantically, like that's beside the point of we need to not isolate ourselves as humans. What do you see happening there?
Well, in addition to having been a matchmaker, I am a science-based dating and relationship coach. I don't do that work as much anymore. However, I do focus on the science and the research behind dating and relationships. And this is something that is not just really dating, it's just relationships. Because I'll give you an example. There's an ongoing study at Harvard that's been around for over 80 years. And what they did was they took some boys that were in school at the time at Harvard and then took some boys from inner cities, and they have been following them. And actually one of the presidents of the United States was part of that study. And what they wanted to figure out was what constitutes happiness, like what is the thing that really builds happiness. And of course, you would imagine that a lot of people would say, being successful, having a lot of money, owning things, etc. But what has come out of that study and continues to go on now, and they've added the children and more people to the study, is that relationships is the number one thing that has a major impact in your life, including into old age. You're likely to, if you have healthy relationships, you'll have less pain, less medical issues. There's a lot of things that come from having healthy relationships. Now, to your point, is not always just your significant other, but a significant other is like a huge percentage of what could unfold in your life in terms of great things or not so great things. But yeah, relationships are super, super important. But I also like to change the narrative. And I always encourage a lot of my coaches out there to stop saying that relationships are hard. they just require effort, like anything else. Like you're going to college, you want to get a degree, you're excited about it. It's going to take effort. You're going to have to go to school, you're going to have to study. And that happens in relationships. There are ups and downs. Everything has that, effect of up and down. And that helps us to determine, the differences, right? And if stuff goes up, you feel that, then it comes down, you feel that, and you can measure the distance and understand the differences, right? That's just life. um so I like to encourage, language is super important to me. My daughter, I would drive her crazy about not using certain words. So I remove things like hard. I remove things like, it's work, do the work. I know people say that all the time. I'm like, just put some effort into it, embrace it. It's part of the learning of life, because I think we're all here to learn, to connect and learn. And by the way, humans are not designed to be alone. There's just certain animals in our earth, that are not designed to be alone, and humans are one of those.
Yes, I love that shift of it takes effort because then that like opens this whole other like room full of opportunity of like, okay, yeah, I can do things that take effort, right? That even it even feels different than, the mantra of I can do hard things.
Yeah, it's more empowering, like, that you can put effort into something, you feel empowered, like, yes, I'm going to do. And if you think about something and the brain doesn't understand whether it's true or not, it just hears certain things and the meaning that's attached to the word. And so when you think of something being hard, other than the surface of a hard thing, it's, oh my God, it's a drudgery. Oh my God, I don't even know if this is possible. That's what your brain hears. And your brain is the CEO of your life, right? So we have to nourish it with good information, using the right words, and also, and I shouldn't say right, I don't like absolutes either, but like putting the effort into just using words, language, and beliefs that are going to empower you and help you achieve the things you want to achieve in life. Often, when you don't see the results of what you want, it has to do with what you're believing and what you're saying to yourself, because there needs to be congruency in just the way we are as humans. And so your actions are going to sync up with what you're believing and saying. And that's why I'm kind of like a stickler for that kind of stuff.
Yes. Oh, I completely agree. I've since I was little, actually, like that was also a big theme that I was taught is, what you say matters. Your words matter. They matter to other people. Um, you know, s- sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never harm me. Like that's that I don't believe that actually. And I want to be really intentional with the words that I say. And I don't, I try. I intentionally choose
I
the
love that.
way that I speak to people.
Yeah. I always say that your thoughts and your words are environments. People only think about an environment of where they are and who they're interacting with. But when you're in your mind and you're thinking, that's also an environment. And when you're talking to yourself, it's also an environment. And so your environment really matters for you to have a successful life, and one with ease and flow rather than hardship and, you know dread and all of that. So,
Yeah, getting through it.
exactly.
Like you just have to keep going just because just to keep no, life doesn't have to be drudgery. Um from the financial planner side of things. So I've been, in the financial planner seat for almost 18 years at this point. And I have worked with a lot of couples. And money in particular can be one of the hardest subjects for people to talk about, for people to agree on. There are just so many things in our relationships that, finances touch, right? It's like, it's not just talking about money, it's everything that money does. within your household to make your household run, how you were raised with money, how your partner was raised with money. Like there's just so much. And so there I have had to be a relationship coach for a long time, and because we have to be able to talk about money. And that so I think that's I want to kind of go in that direction of like, how do we, again, if relationship we need relationships, they're important to our well-being for our whole entire life. In our most tender relationships, right? A relationship with our spouse, we'll start there. It really, really matters that we are able to communicate. We have to be able to talk. We have to be able to share what's coming up. We have to have clear lines of communication and connection. And so what do you see, or how do you help people connect better, communicate better, so that these like typical hot button issues, which, tend to be for a lot of people, money, sex, religion are kind of the big ones. Politics can go in there too, right? How do we talk about these things and maintain our relationships?
Great question. Obviously, ideally, you want to have common key life values before you even enter into a relationship. And to your point, our society, particularly in America, is structured that you're not supposed to talk about money. I totally disagree with that, especially if you're going to merge with someone and you're going to have financial liabilities that get merged, right? So I think it would be great if we can start shifting our paradigm about this issue of not talking about money, because I think money is an energy exchange. So, it's a part of life in our society where if I'm giving you a service, you're going to provide money, and that's the energy exchange right there. As it relates to couples, it's important to understand their background, because if two people are misaligned when it comes to how they spend money, how they make decisions about purchasing things or saving, all of that, it's important to understand their why. Often there's a backstory about how they grew up and what they heard. Money doesn't grow on trees, or we have to save as much as possible. There's so many things. And then what they can do, and fortunately, someone like you, Hannah, you can actually educate them about money, because there's such a huge difference between people who grow up in poverty and the people who grow up wealthy, and the conversations that they have around money and how to make money work for them. For example, like a wealthy person teaches their children, like, this is what you do with your money, this is how you make it grow, etc., and invest. Whereas, when you live in poverty, often there's not that knowledge, and they're more of the consumers, right? You're just making money to consume and to spend and to make enough to make ends meet, etc. So the messaging is very different. And when two people are misaligned, it's important to have those conversations, understand their background, and look for ways to find common ground, because that is a big factor in our divorce rate, the misalignment with money. Also, I agree with you with politics. In the matchmaking world, that completely shifted in our world when you know people became very polarized, because there was a time where people had different understandings of what they felt was appropriate in politics. And I always say, if you're not in politics yourself, or if it's not something that is a deal breaker, remember that it's between you, God, and the voting booth, and that's it. Nothing else is going to happen after that. But that said, there's now an attachment to core values when it comes to politics, and that's why it's become a big thing. So I think these conversations need to be had, before the relationship starts, during, and after, because things will shift and things will change. And couples need to have conversations on a regular basis about what they believe, what they're learning, what they're doing, because that's how people say, well, we grew apart. You don't just grow apart, you stop talking, you stop communicating, you stop learning about each other. People don't, it's not set it and forget it. It's not like you meet someone, you get to know them, and then you're done. No, they keep growing and changing, and so do you. If you're not spending at least 10 minutes a day talking about whatever it is, finances, your hopes and dreams, the things that matter to you, the book that you read and what you learned, then you lose interest in one another and you do fall, grow apart. So to answer your question, and that was a very long-winded answer,
I love it.
have conversations and understand why people do what they do and where they're the messages they have behind that, and look for ways to find common ground and create some sort of what's the word I'm looking for, like a structure where we say, okay, look, let's come together. If we're going to spend more than $500 or whatever that threshold is, let's have a conversation about it so that we can partner in these decisions. That's what I would say about money.
Mm, yeah, it's incredible how much we or what I'll say is how if we are willing to be open, right, and talk about what's coming up emotionally when financial decisions are on the table, that's really been one of my particular um what do I want to say, like areas of genius with people, or like one of the places where I really focus is how are you feeling right now? What's coming up as we discuss this decision? Because that's going to tell us a lot about, yeah, like whose voice are you hearing? Is it your parents or your grandparents or some, other mentor that you looked up to when you were young, like their messages about money coming through? Or is it just like a feeling of dread or a feeling of excitement or a feeling of why isn't my partner listening to me? Right? Like what are all the messages and thoughts that are coming up so that we can talk about that, because a lot of times it's not actually about the money itself. It very rarely is about the money and the dollars. There's always something else that's like really bubbling under the surface. Um, and the other aspect I want to share here is that if we look, so that's like what's going on now, what's happened in the past, what's going on now, a decision that you're making now, right? These are all important places to mine those emotional conversations, but it's also what do you want for the future? When we're talking, what are your dreams for the future? What do you want to experience? What do you want to create together? That has been really interesting too, because what I've noticed over the years that I've been doing financial planning work is that sometimes in some couples, there's one person that will dominate the conversation and the other person that will just be like, yeah, what they said. And gender wise, it can go, either way. Typically, it would be more you know, the husband taking the lead, and this is what we want to experience, and this is how we want to retire, and the wife being like, yeah, okay, what he said, that's fine. And then 10 years later, now we're like, oh, we're divorcing, we're splitting everything in half. And what was the reason? Oh, well, like that's not what the wife wanted the whole time. She never felt like she could actually speak up about what she wanted because he was dominating the conversation. And again, this can go the other way as well. I've seen both more commonly in our society, with women taking the back seat with the finances more often. That's what I've seen happen more. But this not creating shared goals that take into account both people, like really truly asking what do each of us want and how can we co-create something together is the next, like that builds resentment with inside someone if they can't ever speak up. What do you see
Absolutely.
with that?
Well, you picked that right out of my brain because that was going to be my next point about financial matters, is that if you have common goals and a lifestyle goal, for example, or like you said, retirement, there are people who are willing to not even sacrifice, but they're looking ahead and saying, that's where we want to go. So we're going to do this right now so that we can have that. without major, it doesn't have to be a major sacrifice, right? But when there's that alignment of wanting the same things, it's it's life changing, it's magical. But also, it's really important for people to, if you're okay, this is the weird thing, right? Because this, you are in a relationship with someone where there's intimacy, right? Sexual intimacy, all kinds of things, but yet you can't talk about money. And so that's the mindset shift that needs to happen first and foremost, right? Because the money conversation is not about the actual money. It's about what's really inside of you. And what you said before, that most of the time you see it in heterosexual relationships, that it's the man dominating the relationship, but it's almost 60% of divorces are filed or more by women. And so that's the thing. If you made a decision to get married and you have children and everything, and divorces are a lot of work, that I will use the word work because it's something that you probably want to avoid, then these conversations need to happen. The transparency needs to be there. And that's part of the intimacy. Intimacy is not just sex or, intimate conversations about, it's really about being fully open to the person that you're with, because the reality is that you are connected. You're connected financially, you're connected physically, and even your health is regulated by the other person. Your spouse can make your blood pressure go up. I mean, that's how much we regulate each other. So to not be able to have those conversations is so detrimental if you want to keep a relationship healthy and intact. And it means having constant conversations, and it shifts all the time. So it's not a one-time conversation, it's an ongoing thing. So yeah, I agree with you. Knowing what your goals are. I was just looking at my vision board. I created a vision board and I have my husband look at it too. I'm like, Dave, these are the things that I want to, and I'm looking at this one because it's an old one, and most of what's on there is already accomplished. And then it becomes something that he knows about as well. So pick something to start the conversation and get on it because it's so important.
Mm,
Vision board, show it to your spouse and talk about it.
yes. Yeah, I've put I have like my boards. I have cork boards that I keep, cute ones, like right behind my desk. And so I can see, some business goals, some of them are personal goals, and then there's like family stuff on there too. I had, a trip to Walt Disney World on the board for a couple of years, and that happened last year, right? And it's up there, and it's something that we're working on together as well. And I think there's um I think that's actually for me, it feels like the healthier way to go about that. Is like, yes, here are the things that I want to experience and that I want to create. Excuse me, that I want to create in my life, in my business, that I have agency over, that feels good. And then where do we come together? Right? What are our shared goals? What do we do together? And for my husband, like supporting his goals. Like, what do you want to do this year? How do you want to shift your career this year? What are you working on? And to be able to celebrate with him when he hits different milestones, when he has different important conversations at work and gets to, elevate his experience there. That's exciting to me, right? It's that being able to have that person that supports your goals, that you can support their goals, and then you can have shared goals together. Um, and what I'll say, so I'll share a little bit about my relationship. I can't remember how much I've shared on the podcast, in general, but my husband and I met in high school. Technically, we met when we were like very young, like 5, and then we were in a band together. There's a picture of us in the same like honor band in 6th grade. It's adorable. We didn't know each other necessarily, and then we met again in high school and started dating our senior year of high school. And so we've been together for 23 years at this point. It's been a long time. Married for 18, and it feels like the way that I can describe it best is that we've had many relationships
Mm-hmm.
in that time, right? It hasn't been one relationship. We've had many relationships over those years. And when the times that I can remember when, things did feel hard, and where it felt like, I don't know if we're going to make it through this one. It was coming together, having those conversations again, communicating, opening up, being vulnerable, the intimacy that you talked about. I like the definition of that being into me see, right? Like letting you see into my heart
Beautiful.
is that's true intimacy. And I mean, I can literally like remember those different stages, 15 years ago and 10 years ago and 5 years ago. And in the last couple of years, like these big conversations we've had that have opened up and changed
Mm-hmm.
how we relate to one another. And that's, when I talk to people now, we're in our 40s. I have many clients who either have recently gone through divorce or going through divorce now, um, have been divorced, who want to find a partner that they can have that with, that they can have, I want to support them and they support me and we do things together, but we honor each other's individuality. How do you how do you recommend or how do you guide people and guide your matchmakers, right, to help people find that supportive relationship?
I think what's important is that a dater should spend some time having a relationship with themselves to really understand who they are and what is important to them. Because what often happens is people date thinking that they're going to recognize what makes a good match for them when that match shows up. But if you don't know who you are, then you don't know what is a good match for you. And unfortunately, in the divorce space, it's maybe in the 40 percentile if you know that you're likely to get divorced, and then your second marriage goes up to like 70 or 60 something percent. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger, so the likelihood of getting divorced after the first time goes up, after the third time goes up. And often it's because people are not taking the time to get to know themselves. So when you work with a matchmaker, for example, they do a very extensive intake of asking you very important questions that perhaps you haven't even asked yourself, so that they know who makes a good match and you get on the same page about that. That's super important. The other thing to know is relationships are not about getting, there's a lot of giving. And if you're not in the headspace of wanting to give, maybe you are, in a self-discovery phase or self-involved, that's perfectly okay. But you need to know that in order for you not to waste somebody else's time. Because the reality is if you're going into relationships wanting, that's not really what it's all about. There you will receive, but there's actually more pleasure, and there's a lot of science about this, in the giving than there is in the taking. And the people who are takers, they're like sometimes are a bottomless pit of like, because it doesn't matter how much you get, there's a hole, there's an emptiness that you need to figure out, that has nothing to do with the take. So um oh my gosh, relationships are complex but exciting and interesting, and you learn so much about yourself and you learn so much about the other person. But it's something that you want to be in the mindset to have. Like, I went through a phase in my life where I was married for almost 17 years and then single for a period of time that I really needed to be single. I needed to regain my sense of self, understand who I really was, what I wanted and needed in my life. And I spent a fair amount of time single, and then I got married again in my 40s. My husband and I have been together for 14 years now. And you were saying how long you were married. I'm like, oh my gosh, she looks like she's in her 20s. But the
Thank you.
reality, I mean, the reality is that when you know who you are and what your needs are in that moment, then maybe this is the time for you to go out and have fun and date and whatever, because you're not ready to give. Because that's relationships is a lot about giving. And the other thing that you said, which is so important, I'm always checking in with my husband about what his goals are and what he wants to accomplish so that I can help him accomplish that. And he does it with me. That's part of the partnership, but there's a lot of fulfillment and fun in that. And then the last thing I would say is I like to do a couple's bucket list. So at the end of this past year, my husband and I sat down and we talked about certain things we wanted to do in the new year. One of which was to take a really extensive trip in Europe. So we're going to Paris in July, and we're renting a yacht and going through the canals for 7 days, and then we're going to go to the Alps and all this. But how do you get there? It's first talking about it, saying this is what's important to us. Let's figure out a way to make this happen, and then putting a plan in place and getting it done. And to me, that's manifesting. It's not manifesting is not thinking you want something, you want to do it, and it's just going to miraculously appear. No, manifesting is knowing what you want,
Mm-hmm.
and then constantly, like the vision board, looking at it on a regular basis so that it's top of mind. It's in your brain is primed to seize those opportunities, and then taking action. And so that's what we do. We always do a couple's bucket list of things that we want to accomplish in the following year, and most of it happens.
I love that. And I totally um, relate to that definition of manifesting as well. It's, having that specificity. What is it that you want to experience or feel? Or for some people, what do you actually like want to do? So where's a thing you want to, where you want to go, a thing you want to experience, and then being open to the opportunities, like you said, like now the blinders are off, like you can be open to opportunities, right? For some people, that trip to Paris might look like, oh, like here's my email, there's, a flight, they're doing a special for exactly the time that we want to go. Like that's it. That's now I'm going to take that action, right? The flights aren't going to magically, appear and someone's going to, come to your house and like take you in a limo to on your private jet just magically, right? No, it's going to be the opportunities are going to come into your world. Maybe it's, hey, can you come speak at a conference in Paris in July, right? And you're like, wait, hold on. I wanted to go to Paris this year. Yes. Let me say yes to that opportunity. We don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to happen, but if we have that intention of this is what I want to experience
Yeah.
together, yeah, and letting the universe like do its thing to help the opportunities come into your awareness more easily.
Yeah, and you're by doing that, you're priming your brain so that it seizes those opportunities, because our brains filter out a lot of information because we have so much information coming to us. But once it becomes part of your consciousness, then you see it all the time. It's like when you buy a red car of a certain brand and you're driving and now you see it everywhere. It's because it's just primed in your brain. And so that's why I love doing that kind of thing. But the other thing I wanted to go back to that you mentioned, that you've had multiple relationships with your husband, I feel the same way. And I also feel that when we have those challenges and we are able to climb that mountain and get on the other side, it's like, I think that triggers a new relationship and a new connectedness, that we were able to overcome something. And it's amazing. And also doing things that we've never done, neither one of us, that's what keeps a relationship exciting and healthy, because it it's proven, there's research behind doing new things together. As a matter of fact, when you first start dating someone, if you do new things that you've never done before with that person, you're more likely to fall in love with them,
Oh, wow.
because it's an arousal, and our brains are primed. That's what happens, all the hormones and things that go through our bodies. So but that happens in relationships too. When you start to feel that it's getting stale, if you do new things together, that actually enhances the relationship. Yeah, it's a very complex topic, and I love the correlation between money and relationships, because a lot of the activities and things that we think about that we want to do relates to having that financial ability. and the planning that goes into it as well. And so getting on the same page about finances is very important to be able to accomplish all those things and build together.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's um one of the most fun parts of what I do is when people can like check those bucket list
Yeah.
items off. Like we did this thing, we had the money, it's saved, it's there, or however that happens, like yes, we're going to do this thing. We're going to build our dream house. We're going to send our kids to college. We're going to take the big vacation. When that's like, yep, here we go. Transfer the money over and you're doing your thing. That feels so good. And usually because I have relationships with my clients, I get pictures, I get right like, oh, it's exciting. So yeah, it's the again, intentionality is one of my biggest words in any given year. Really, just like what's the intention that you want to bring to your finances, to your relationships, to what you want to experience. Um, so, in our last couple of minutes here, Arlene, I would love for you to be able to share, like, if people are listening to you, if they are a matchmaker and are like, oh, tell me more about what's going on with that. If they want to be a matchmaker, if they want to know more about relationships, what are the things that you have available? Where can people find you? What's coming up?
Thank you. Well, I have three pillars in my business. One is the Love Pro Mastermind Academy, which is a an academy for anyone who is an existing matchmaker and wants to up level their business, or someone who's an aspiring matchmaker. There's a 1 year program that trains them on everything they need to know to have a successful business and to be able to help more people. There is an area that a big area for me is ethics and compliance. So there's the International Matchmaking Compliance Board, which is a lot of training and accrediting companies to make sure that they're behaving ethically and being compliant with laws, so that the daters and the people that their clients are getting good service and ethical services, etc. And then the last thing is for anyone who's a dater, if they're interested in meeting a matchmaker, hiring one, we sort of have a clearinghouse of the most ethical and best matchmakers. We know, and this is worldwide, we know the target market that they work in, what their price points are, etc. So we have a referral network where the daters can come to us and we will provide them with information on who might be a good matchmaker for them. So it's a lot, but it's all within the same area. I'm on all social media at Arlene Washburn, so people can reach out to me through there, or they can, if they're interested in becoming a matchmaker or learning more about the industry, which is very fulfilling and very lucrative. It's Love Pro Mastermind Academy, and I'll share with you all the other, websites so that people have that.
Oh, beautiful. If anyone would like to know more about that, all of the links are in the show notes as usual. And Arlene, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Again, relationships are so very dear to my heart and important in my work and, you know, relationships with ourselves first and then with our significant others, with our children, with our parents, relationships are just they are what we are here to experience, I believe, as humans. So thank you. Thank you for talking with me.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope to stay in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe. And again, if anything resonated with you from this episode, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Hannah, HANNAH, at expansiveceo.com and tell me about it. And if you're ready for your greatest expansion, you can find ways to work with me at expansiveceo.com and at x2wealthplanning.com. That's X, the numeral 2, wealthplanning.com. So until next time, remember that there is enough, you are enough, and your birthright in this lifetime is to be expansive.